Don't let her near the cake. She smells like hospital soap. It'll ruin the photos. That's what my daughter-in-law told the host of the baby gender reveal, loud enough that I and every single person standing within 10 feet heard her. Her voice was as sweet and airy as the pink and blue balloons floating above us, but the words sliced through me like frost against skin. I stood there holding the gift bag I had spent 3 hours preparing, ribbon curled, tag handwritten with love, and I swear I could feel the room suck the air out from around me. The host, some influencer friend of hers with a ring light clipped to her pocket, gave me a quick glance and chuckled nervously, like I was a stain to be blurred out. I had brought my own chair because my hip can't handle standing long. I was recovering from a small procedure, which was exactly why I still smelled faintly of hospital soap. But even that moment didn't feel real. My hands trembled slightly as I set the gift down on the folding table. My son, my only child, didn't look over. He kept laughing with her friends, fiddling with some confetti cannons. I tried to meet his eyes, just for a second. I wanted a lifeline, anything, but there was nothing. No recognition, no defense, just a sea of people smiling politely, not wanting to get involved. If you've ever watched a woman being erased from her own family, step by step, in public, then stay with me. And please, comment below where you're watching from. Has this kind of cruelty ever happened where you live? Because I want to know how far this poison spreads. And if you're someone who believes justice still has a voice, hit subscribe. This story, you won't believe where it goes. I used to be the kind of woman people came to for recipes, for advice on how to baby-proof a house, for which pediatrician doesn't overprescribe antibiotics. I was a nurse for 27 years. I helped deliver babies, soothe first-time mothers, and sit through long nights with crying infants whose parents didn't know how to cope. So when my son told me he and Madison were expecting, I cried tears of joy. I offered them my spare room if they ever needed it. I knitted a little green sweater with wooden buttons, and I cleared out a section of my closet to store baby items. I was ready. I was thrilled. But from the moment the wedding ended, something started shifting. Madison, my daughter-in-law, became colder, not distant in a shy way. Strategic. Like every moment I was around needed to be minimized, sanitized, controlled. I wasn't even supposed to be at the gender reveal. I found out about it from a friend whose daughter saw the invite on Instagram. My son said they thought I'd be too tired to come. Tired, I cleared my schedule. I baked cupcakes with little pink and blue swirl tops and added edible gold stars. When I arrived, I wasn't on the guest list. The host looked at me like I had crashed a high school party. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "I'm the grandmother." But even that felt strange. Nobody looked at me with familiarity. I was a title, not a person. They had a photo wall with Madison's mother, a spa owner who wore high heels on grass, smiling in every shot. I wasn't in a single photo. I wasn't asked to take one. Not even when they said, "Let's do family only." When they brought out the cake. A pristine, fondant-covered tower of pinks and blues. I stepped closer instinctively. I thought maybe I could light the candles or hand out plates. That's when she said it. Loud. Smiling. "Don't let her near the cake. She smells like hospital soap. It'll ruin the photos." Everyone laughed. I froze. I didn't cry. Not right then. I just nodded, as if I agreed with them. I walked over to my chair and sat down, staring at the balloons, at the pastel signs, at the tray of cupcakes that now looked like clown food. That moment played in my head over and over like a loop. My scent, of all things, had become offensive. My presence, even silent and smiling, was too much. Nobody saw me leave. I walked out through the side gate. My gift stayed unopened on the table. My cupcakes remained untouched. I remember thinking, am I that forgettable? I got into my car and stared at my hands on the wheel. My ring was still on my finger, my wedding ring, even though Harold had passed 2 years ago. Madison once said it looked vintage in a dated way, and now I couldn't unhear it. I gripped the wheel harder and harder until my knuckles were pale. I didn't drive home immediately. I sat there for almost an hour, letting the humiliation sink in, letting the silence hit. My son didn't call that night, or the day after, or the week after. I sent a polite message. Let me know how the appointment went. Love you both. No reply. On day 4, I called, voicemail. I waited 2 more days and tried again. This time, the line didn't even ring, just straight to voicemail. That's when I realized they had silenced me completely, but it wasn't just about phones. It wasn't just about missed calls or rude jokes. Something deeper had changed. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being erased methodically, intentionally, and everyone was letting it happen. Even him. My boy. My only child. When did I become someone who needed to fight for the right to hand out a slice of cake that night? I took off my wedding ring and placed it in a velvet pouch. Not because I was letting go of Harold, but because I realized I was going to have to fight this battle alone. And for that, I couldn't carry the weight of who I used to be. I needed to become someone sharper, someone invisible who watches, listens, remembers. Because Madison had just drawn a line in the sand, and I had stepped over it. She thought I would crumble from embarrassment, that I would disappear like old perfume, faint and irrelevant. But what she didn't know was that I've spent my whole life in rooms people didn't want to enter. I've seen what happens when no one speaks up. And I promised myself quietly, coldly, that I would not be erased. But I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. The silence after the gender reveal was different. Not just empty, it was orchestrated. A deliberate void. I told myself it was just the shock of the moment, that maybe my daughter-in-law had had a bad day, or that I'd misheard her. I tried to give them space. I didn't text. I didn't show up. I waited. And yet, the silence only grew louder. 1 week turned to 2, then 3. Finally, I decided to stop by, just to drop off some baby mittens I'd crocheted cream with little bear ears. I parked outside their house and walked up the familiar path. I noticed the ring camera was new, sleek, black. It didn't blink, just stared. When I pressed the doorbell, the chime was different, cold, and digital. My son used to have that funny bell that sounded like Big Ben. I waited. No one answered. Then I opened the mailbox slot and slid the package in gently, whispering, "Just some mittens. Hope the baby's kicking." That night, I got a message from Madison, just one line. "Please don't leave items unannounced. We're being cautious about surfaces." That was the word she used. Surfaces, not us, not the baby. Just surfaces. I sat in my kitchen, the same one where I used to make her butternut squash soup when she was pregnant with her first, and reread the message like it was some encrypted curse. I replied with a simple, "Of course. I understand." But I didn't. Not really. The next sign came quietly. I drove over a few days later to drop off my son's childhood photo album, one he had asked for months ago, but never picked up. As I approached the house, I noticed the gate code had changed. I used to know it by heart, their anniversary. Now, the keypad flashed red each time I entered the numbers. A neighbor, the woman who walks her schnauzer past their lawn every day, waved and said, "Oh, they updated the security." Madison mentioned something about minimizing access. I smiled weakly. Minimizing access. That phrase echoed for hours afterward. It sounded like corporate speak, like I was a liability. Eventually, my son texted to say I could leave the album at the porch, that they were resting and would grab it later. I asked if he wanted to meet for tea soon. He said, "We're booked this month, maybe sometime next." The next never came. Then came the keys. My copy, the one they gave me after their wedding, no longer worked. At first, I thought the lock was stiff, but after 3 visits and no success, I realized the truth. No one had told me. No one had even bothered to lie. The locks were changed, and I was no longer someone worth informing. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how many mothers had experienced this one day you're trusted with the spare key and freezer access, and the next you're just omitted, forgotten, like expired coupons in a drawer. It didn't stop there. I started noticing subtle cues. When I brought over a vintage high chair I'd saved from my nursing days, the kind that clamps safely to a table, I got a message later that week saying, "We've gone with modern, safety-rated baby gear. Thank you for the thought. No. We appreciate it. No warmth, just bureaucracy masked as politeness." Then came the medication mix-up. I always kept my thyroid medication in a clearly labelled pill organizer. One afternoon when they visited, I noticed someone had moved the organizer from the top shelf to a locked drawer. I didn't lock it. When I asked Madison casually, half joking, if she'd seen it, she said, "Oh, I thought it was one of your herbal things. Just wanted to be safe. You know, with the baby and all." I laughed along, but my chest tightened. Herbal things. That organizer had prescriptions with my name. Dosage. Dates. She knew. Of course she did. She just wanted me to feel misplaced in my own home. Bit by bit, my identity was being reframed. My own son started sounding off, detached. Once, when we spoke briefly on the phone, he called me Mom by accident, then chuckled and said, "Sorry, I've been so formal lately." I knew the tone. I used to hear it from patients when they were coached by social workers. Polite, careful, scripted, like I was a case file, not a mother. There was one evening I'll never forget. I dropped off a crock-pot meal chicken stew with dumplings, one of my son's favorites. I left it on the doorstep in a thermal bag. Hours later, I saw Madison's Instagram story. She had posted a boomerang of their dinner vibes, tagging a fancy vegan delivery service with the caption, "No mystery ingredients, just pure, healthy love." I stared at that caption. Mystery ingredients. Was I now a contamination risk? That's when the baby app incident happened. I had signed up innocently for an app that let family members track the pregnancy updates. One day, my access vanished. The app said I had been removed by the primary account holder. No explanation. Just gone. Like I had never belonged. I emailed the support team thinking it was a mistake. Their reply was curt. Access removal decisions are final and at the discretion of the family admin. That admin was Madison. Everything was being tightened, controlled, restrained. I wasn't even being blamed, which would have at least acknowledged me. I was being rendered invisible. My photos on the wall replaced. The family photo I gave them last Christmas with Harold in his favourite flannel no longer sat on their bookshelf. In its place was a framed quote, "Boundaries are a form of self-care." There comes a moment where the ache turns into numbness, where the questions no longer start with why, but how much longer. That's where I was, sitting in my own living room, watching my life shrink, watching my reflection in the microwave door and thinking, how did I go from raising a child to being treated like an intruder? Maybe some of you understand. Maybe some of you have felt your role, your name, your space slowly taken from you, piece by silent piece. And if that's you, I hope you'll comment below. Not just for me, but because your story might be the one someone else needs to read right now to feel less alone. Sometimes, silence isn't safety. It's a slow erasure. Let's not let each other vanish quietly. The final straw. It wasn't dramatic. It never is. It was subtle, the way these things always are. I went to drop off a book for my son, one he loved as a kid, and noticed a new nameplate on their mailbox. Just 2 names. The Hendersons, Madison and Caleb. No mention of mom, family, or even just a generic, the Henderson family. I stared at it for a long time. Then I realized even the mailbox had stopped making room for me. I turned, walked back to my car, and sat in silence. That nameplate felt heavier than any insult. It was a boundary carved in steel. And I could feel the next steps coming like a train whose whistle you hear long before you see the smoke. But what I didn't know was that I was one step away from being completely erased from my own home. I stopped hearing the baby's name, not out loud, not in texts, not even in passing. When Madison was early in her pregnancy, she'd send updates, little bean kicked today, or craving pickles, baby's fault. But now, silence. No belly photos, no updates, no messages. My son, Caleb, had stopped sharing anything. It was as if the baby existed in a sealed world, and I no longer had clearance. I had to find out the due date from a neighbor's daughter who still followed Madison's private account. She whispered, "Didn't you see the announcement post? They're due early June." And I had to lie. I nodded, like I knew, like I was still part of that timeline. But in reality, I was running months behind like a ghost, trying to keep up with the living. I tried to maintain my presence in subtle ways. I dropped off a baby blanket I had crocheted, left it in a gift bag on their porch. No reply. I offered to help coordinate a prenatal massage radio silence. At some point, you stop reaching out not because you don't care, but because you're scared of how invisible you'll feel when no one reaches back. When Caleb did respond, it was brief and formal. "Thanks for the drop-off. We're resting today. Busy week ahead." All his messages read like calendar reminders. Gone was the warmth, the thanks, Mom, the inside jokes, the shared glances over family dinners. I thought maybe I had done something offended him. So I apologized. For what? I wasn't sure. I texted, "If I've overstepped or said anything wrong, I'm truly sorry. I love you." His reply, "It's not about blame. We're just adjusting priorities right now." Priorities. That word broke something in me. Then, slowly, the social world around me began to change. People I had always spoken with at the community garden began to act careful. They didn't mention Madison, or Caleb, or the baby. One friend, Sharon, finally admitted she had been asked not to interfere because it was a delicate family boundary issue. Interfere. We used to plan baby shower games together. Now I was interference that week. I went to the local grocery store and saw Madison's mother at the checkout. She had an entire cart filled with party favors, pastel pink and sky blue, paper lanterns, a cake box labeled baby shower. I walked toward her, smiling instinctively. She looked up, then turned her cart around and left the aisle without a word. As if I had been a customer service complaint she didn't want to deal with. Later that night, I saw photos online. The baby shower had already happened. I wasn't invited, not even acknowledged. My heart didn't just ache, it thudded in a hollow way, like something inside had gone missing. A grandmother not invited to the shower, not even mentioned. I tried not to let it define me. But what do you do when the milestones of your grandchild are celebrated and you're erased from them entirely? Even the smallest things began to feel loaded. Once, I saw Madison at the farmer's market, standing at a candle stall. I approached slowly, unsure if I should say hello. As I neared, she turned, and for 1 second, our eyes locked. Then she turned her back and began sniffing a lavender candle, as if I hadn't just entered her space. I stood there for a full 5 seconds, frozen in place. And then I turned away, pretending I had been headed somewhere else. That walk back to my car felt like a mile long. The hardest part wasn't the coldness. It was the growing suspicion that maybe I had done something. Maybe I had been too much. Maybe I was annoying, outdated, overbearing. I began questioning everything: my tone, my messages, my gifts. I reread texts a dozen times before sending them. I asked friends. Was that email too forward? I Googled articles like how to be a low-maintenance mother-in-law. I even considered seeing a therapist, just to figure out what invisible line I had crossed. It was like being gaslit without a spark, just quiet suffocation. No one yelled, no one accused. But I was vanishing, one boundary at a time. I stopped being called grandma-to-be. I stopped being asked for advice. I stopped being seen. And the worst moment came when my son, my boy, who once clutched my hand during a thunderstorm, told me, in the calmest voice possible, "We just need a little space right now." I nodded. Of course. Space. How much more could I give? I was no longer in their house, no longer in their photos, no longer in their stories. What else could I vacate? You know, there's a particular kind of grief that comes from being alive and erased at the same time. When people talk about loss, they imagine funerals and phone calls. But this kind of loss, this slow erasure from the people you love, it doesn't come with flowers or casseroles. It comes with polite texts, missed calls, and photos you're not tagged in. Have you ever felt yourself slipping out of someone's life and no one tried to stop you? If you have, tell me below. Leave a comment, not just for me, but for anyone else who's reading this and wondering if they're going crazy. Your voice might be the thing that tells them they're not alone. Sometimes all it takes is someone saying, "Yes, me too." There was one evening I decided to surprise Caleb. I baked his favorite cornbread, packed it in a warm basket, and drove over. It was dusk. I knew their routine walks after dinner. Madison in her maternity wrap. Caleb holding her elbow like he used to hold mine when I twisted my ankle in high school. As I turned the corner, I saw them walking. But not just the two of them. Her mother was with them, laughing, holding a reusable water bottle and pointing at a garden gnome across the lawn. I slowed down, rolled the window down, waited for one of them to see me. Caleb did. Our eyes locked, but then he looked away. He didn't wave. didn't smile. He just continued walking. I didn't honk. I didn't call out. I drove past. And when I got home, I threw the cornbread in the trash. The next morning, I received a text. Hey, Mum, sorry I missed you yesterday. We were decompressing. Hope all's well. Decompressing. That's what my presence had become. A pressure needing release. I stopped texting after that. I stopped trying. But silence doesn't just end things. It breeds questions, doubt. It chips away at what you once knew to be solid. I found myself staring at photos from Caleb's childhood, wondering if I had imagined those moments. Had he always kept a distance, and I just hadn't seen it? Had Madison helped him step into boundaries he was too afraid to name himself? Or had I somehow failed in a way so quiet? No one told me I started dreaming of being invisible. Literal dreams where I would walk into a room and no one would see me. Where I'd speak and no one would respond. And each time I woke up, there was a moment, just one beat, where I was unsure if I had actually woken at all. Then came the moment that snapped everything into clarity. I stopped by my church one afternoon to drop off baked goods. On the bulletin board outside the fellowship hall, someone had pinned a printed flyer for a community parenting group, expecting parents and grandparents building healthy support systems. I reached out, curious. It had my daughter-in-law's name listed as a lead contributor. I never knew she was involved. I never knew they were building a support system. I had assumed I was supposed to be that support. But they had built it without me, named it without me, and invited others without me. As I stared at the flyer, my hand trembling, something shifted. I no longer felt confusion. I no longer felt ache. I felt cold, focused, like a nurse prepping for triage. I had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't, why are they doing this? It was, how far are they willing to go? And I was about to find out. It started with the fall, not metaphorical, a real one. I slipped on the back steps of my own house, the ones Caleb promised he'd fix last year. My knee gave out. I hit the side of my shoulder against the wooden railing and tumbled awkwardly onto the grass. My hand twisted beneath me. I lay there, stunned. Not from the pain, but from the fact that I couldn't move right away. Not because of injury, but because I didn't want to. I didn't want to get up. It was one of those moments where the physical world finally matched the emotional one, flattened. Stuck. I eventually crawled inside, bruised but not broken. I made tea, icing my wrist with a bag of frozen peas, and stared out the window at the fading light. No one called that night, or the next. Not even a check-in. I hadn't told Caleb about the fall, and realized that if I had, it probably wouldn't have changed anything. A few days later, I received a letter from the health insurance provider. It was a pre-authorization denial for neurological evaluation. I blinked. I hadn't requested any evaluations. I read the letter again. Pre-approval for cognitive assessment denied due to incomplete supporting documentation. The provider listed Caleb as the family contact. I called the number listed, thinking it was a mix-up. The woman on the line said cheerily, "Oh, it says here the request came from a primary family advocate. Let me check. Yes. A Madison Henderson. Madison." I felt the room tilt. I asked calmly, carefully why a request would have been submitted without my consent. She hesitated, then said, "We're not authorized to share clinical intentions, but this form was filed under a cognitive well-being initiative. Usually it's family-initiated when there's concern for early decline." decline. The word clanged like a dropped pan. I hung up, and I sat still for 10 minutes. 10 full minutes. Then I called my own doctor. No such request had been routed through his office. This wasn't a clinical process. It was private. It was quiet. It was intentional. Someone had filed paperwork behind my back to begin the process of questioning my mental capacity. And it wasn't just anyone. It was my daughter-in-law. The silence of the past few months now took on a shape. This wasn't passive cruelty. It was strategy. I was being reframed not as a grandmother, or a mother, or even a human being, but as a problem. Something to be managed. Legally, perhaps. Financially. Emotionally. Removed. 2 days later. I stopped by the bank. I had to reorder checks. I was friendly with Linda, the branch manager. She had known Caleb since he was in high school. As she pulled up my file, she paused. "That's odd," she said. "I thought you had another authorized signer on your home account." I looked at her. "No, it's just me." She turned her screen toward me. There it was, a second name. Madison Henderson. Added 6 weeks ago. I stood there, my mouth open. Linda caught my expression and said, "Wait, was this not approved by you?" I shook my head. Slowly, she closed the screen, her voice lowered. "This might require a legal flag, just so you know. Want me to file it?" I nodded, my fingers numb. She printed something out discreetly and slid it across the desk, a request form for financial oversight redaction. I signed it with a hand that trembled slightly. When I got home, I tore apart my filing cabinet. I checked every envelope, every account, every piece of mail. And then I found it a nondescript envelope tucked into my property tax file. It was a pre-printed form. Authorization for medical communication access. It had my name, my birthday, and Madison's email listed as the secondary medical contact, dated and submitted 3 months prior. I hadn't signed it. The realization hit like a flood. This was a campaign. A soft, quiet campaign to document my decline, to establish herself as someone necessary, indispensable to my daily affairs. And once that was in place, she could make decisions, move assets, reframe me as unstable, remove me entirely. That night, I sat in my bedroom with the blinds drawn and all the lights off. I listened to my own breathing. I felt like I was living someone else's life, or worse, being written out of my own. But just when I thought it couldn't twist any further, the phone rang. It was Carla, a retired nurse who had worked with me for 2 decades and now took part-time gigs doing home visits. "You're not going to believe who I saw today," she said. "I got booked to do a wellness check for a prenatal client. Guess who opened the door? I didn't have to guess. Madison." I said, "Bingo." She didn't recognize me. I stayed quiet. "But here's the thing. During the visit, she mentioned you." I held my breath. "She said she was trying to be patient, but that you were showing signs of mental confusion and possibly hoarding behavior. That she was keeping notes in case the baby's safety ever came into question." I sat there frozen. "She said what I'm telling you this because I know you. You were the most lucid, meticulous head nurse I've ever worked with. If someone's starting a paper trail on you, you better start your own. Fast." That night, I didn't sleep. I organized every file I had. I printed call logs, bank changes, the letter from the insurance company. I dug up copies of my property ownership. I made duplicates. I stored some at home. I gave others to Carla. I even began recording voicemails and printing texts. For the first time in months, I didn't feel helpless. I felt like myself again, the version of me that charted vitals while everyone else panicked. I kept repeating Carla's words in my head. If they're building a paper trail, you better build yours first. You know, it's strange how betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives with forms and polite emails. Sometimes it's packaged in words like care, concern, and stability. And when it does, the most dangerous thing you can do is stay quiet. Have any of you ever realized too late that someone had been quietly building a case against you? That the people who said they were just trying to help were actually trying to remove you? If you have, I need you to leave a comment below. Say it out loud. For all of us who stayed silent until the paperwork arrived. From that night forward, I kept my phone charged at all times. I made copies of everything. I stopped questioning my instincts, because now I knew Madison wasn't waiting for me to disappear. She was preparing to make it official. And from that moment on, I wasn't afraid anymore. I started watching. It began with a calendar invite, just a harmless-looking email in my inbox titled Pre-Planning Summer Transition Talk. At first, I assumed it was spam, but then I noticed the sender. It was Madison using a new email address, one that ended in consulting. I clicked open. The message was vague draft agenda for possible family schedule shift during postpartum support. We'll discuss roles, routines, boundaries. I read it 3 times. It didn't mention my name directly, but it was clear I was the role in question. The word transition burned. I wasn't being included in a plan. I was the plan, a scheduled phase out. That night, I started going through my voicemail recordings. I had gotten into the habit of saving messages ever since Carla's warning. Most were routine pharmacy updates, appointment confirmations. But then I found a voicemail I had missed while in the shower 2 weeks prior. It was Madison's voice, though she hadn't realized the call had gone through. I hit play. She's getting clingier. I think we should move up the timeline. Talk to the lawyer next week. If we wait too long, she might complicate things. You know how she gets. Click. The rest of the message was static, but it was enough. The lawyer. The timeline. Complicate things. I saved the file to 3 different locations. I decided to start keeping a formal record. I bought a hardbound notebook, blue with gold-lined edges. The first entry read, March 12th voicemail from Madison regarding timeline and consultation with lawyer. Over the next days, I added notes on every interaction, strange comments, excluded messages, inconsistent explanations. I even wrote down things I overheard from their mutual friends at the grocery store, like the Pilates instructor who said, Madison mentioned they might need temporary guardianship support for someone in the family. Wild. Right. Temporary guardianship. Of who? That's when I reached out to Daniel. Daniel was a former colleague of Harold's, my late husband. They had worked in property risk management for years. He was precise, methodical, and trustworthy. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. Start by checking your deed and any trusts Harold left behind, he said. Look for updates made within the last year, especially anything notarized electronically. That's how they slip changes through now, so I pulled out the file cabinet again. Harold had established a living trust in 2015. It placed our home under both our names with survivorship rights. But as I scanned the document, I noticed an addendum dated 4 months ago. It stated that upon review and in light of changing cognitive capacity, Primary residence authority had been shifted to designated family representative until capacity could be legally reconfirmed. The signature next to the change wasn't mine. It was a digital signature block with my name and an IP address logged from their neighborhood. I stared at the page. My hand clenched the paper so tightly it wrinkled. I took photos of every page, sent copies to Daniel. He replied within 20 minutes. "This is forged. Get a legal timestamp of your current signature immediately. We may need a forensic handwriting comparison later." So I did. I drove to the notary's office that same afternoon and signed 5 documents, all time-stamped. Witnessed. My hand shook, but not from fear, from fire. I was no longer playing defense. I was building my case. Over the next few days, I began scanning everything Madison had ever sent me: emails, texts, even those innocuous updates she used to share. Patterns emerged: coded phrases like structured transition, unregulated contact, and boundary-reinforced environment. She was writing like someone preparing for court, softening words that, when pieced together, outlined a clear intention to document me as unstable, isolate me, and assume control. I started planting quiet traps. I asked Caleb casually about a charity event he once loved, knowing he hadn't attended in years. He replied, "I haven't had time. You know how things are." I asked Madison if they'd received the wooden mobile I mailed hand-carved forest animals. She said yes, and thanked me. But the mobile was never mailed. I had it still sitting on my dining room table, unopened. She was lying, without hesitation. That's when I installed a motion-triggered camera near my mailbox and front porch just in case. I also started keeping a digital log on an encrypted drive, with daily backups. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing, because every smile, every thank you for understanding, now sounded like a countdown. Then came the day Carla called again. "You won't believe what I overheard today." Madison was on the phone in the hallway during a wellness check. She said, and I quote, "Once the documents are submitted, the state might need a declaration. I've got the meds. I've got her calendar inconsistencies, and even the mail she misplaces." Meds, calendar inconsistencies, misplaced mail. They were creating a case file, one detail at a time, one carefully curated anecdote at a time. It wasn't slander. It was a slow fiction being built as fact. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I began recording myself. Every morning, I would speak into a voice journal recounting the previous day, logging appointments, times, dates, names. I backed it up with physical notes and photographs. I even placed post-its on my pantry and bathroom cabinets with inventory logs in case she ever claimed I was hoarding or confused. Some nights, I'd sit at my kitchen table staring at the corkboard I'd built filled with dates, quotes, photocopies, voicemail transcriptions, and printed emails. It looked like something from a detective show, but it wasn't paranoia. It was proof. And I wasn't crazy. I was being hunted quietly, professionally, and without confrontation. What Madison hadn't realized was that I knew how to outwait storms. I had survived the night shift in trauma units, survived Harold's slow cancer, and survived the grief that followed. What's one more quiet war? You know? Sometimes we assume we'll recognize betrayal by how loud it is, shouting matches, slammed doors. But the worst betrayals come with polite smiles and legal documents. And if you've ever been through something like this, if someone ever built a case against you while still calling you mom to your face, I need you to speak. Leave a comment below. Your story might help someone who's one form away from being erased, because I almost missed the next step. And if I had, everything would have collapsed. One night, I got an alert on my phone. A motion sensor had detected movement at my front door at 2:41 a.m. The footage showed someone walking up quietly, hooded, carrying something in their hand. They knelt, then left. In the morning, I opened the mailbox. Inside was a blank envelope with no return address. Inside it, a printed letter, a draft legal document. It was a petition for adult protective supervision, filed in my name, signed, with my son's name. I know what people see when they look at her. Kind eyes, that soft nurse's voice, the graceful aging, the well-pressed cardigans, the homemade casserole dishes she insists on returning clean. They see warmth, but that's not what I see. When I look at my mother-in-law, I see shadow. The kind of shadow that settles into every corner of your home. Gently at first, until you wake up one day and realize you can't move without her watching. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't insult directly. She just exists everywhere. With her perfect memory of how Caleb liked his socks folded, or how his pediatrician once warned against early exposure to dairy. She sits at the edge of every conversation, correcting timelines, finishing thoughts, adjusting details. When we got engaged, she told my mom I'll handle the guest list. Madison has a lot on her plate. My own mother was stunned into silence. I wasn't. I was already used to it, because I've known that type of woman before. My mother was the same, a master of the polite override. I was raised in a house where feelings didn't matter unless they were hers. I didn't cry without permission. I didn't question things that weren't age-appropriate. I didn't get to decide how I dressed, who I talked to, what I studied. I was told repeatedly that being respected meant being useful, that if you weren't indispensable, you were disposable. So I learned how to survive. I became the girl who planned everything, who apologized first, who kept track of everyone's schedules, who never forgot a birthday. And somewhere along the line, I also became the woman who controlled or got crushed. There was no middle. When I met Caleb, he was different. He was soft, gentle in a way that confused me. He didn't raise his voice, didn't keep score, didn't hover. He asked questions. He waited for answers. He treated my opinions like they mattered. And for a while, I thought I had escaped that gravitational pull. But then came her, the mother, the living legend. Mom knows best was not just a phrase, it was an operating system. At first, I tried, truly. I called her for advice. I thanked her for gifts. I even tried cooking her recipes only to be told, sweetly, that I'd missed her little trick with the cinnamon. She visited our apartment and accidentally reorganized our kitchen. When we moved into our house, she showed up with curtain rods and said, "The ones you picked might make the baby's eyes too sensitive to light." The baby. That's when everything cracked. Pregnancy makes you vulnerable. And when you're trying to form a family of your own, the last thing you want is someone whispering, "It worked better when I did it this way." I was drowning in her legacy. Every milestone felt like a hand-me-down. I tried setting boundaries, gentle ones. "Please text before you drop by. We want to try things our way first. We're going to make our own decisions." But each request was met with subtle guilt. "Oh, I thought this was still home," or "I didn't want to bother you, just thought I could help." She didn't listen. She adapted. She shrank just enough to look non-threatening. then reappeared elsewhere through Caleb, through our friends, through traditions I didn't create but was expected to uphold. When we discussed the baby's name, she jokingly said, "Well, you know what side of the family built this house. I think we get a little say, don't you?" I began to panic. Not the flailing kind, the quiet, sleepless kind. The one where you wake up wondering how long it'll be before your child prefers someone else's arms. I started keeping notes, not to be cruel, to protect myself. I recorded the comments. I documented the oversteps, because I knew no one would believe me. Not against her. And yes, I filed the medical concern request, because she did start repeating herself. She did confuse appointments. She once left a baby gift in our mailbox for a week. In summer heat, the formula inside had expired. Maybe it was just grief. Maybe it was something else. But I couldn't wait to find out after damage was done. Not with a newborn coming. And I added myself to her account. Yes, I did that too. Because when someone refuses to acknowledge boundaries, you stop asking permission, you start claiming control. Do I feel proud of it? No. But do I regret it? Not yet. The hardest part has been Caleb. He doesn't see it. Not fully. He thinks I'm being sensitive, overreacting. That's just mom. He says, she means well. Of course she does. They always do. But I didn't marry her. I married him. And I want a house where I don't feel like a guest in her curated history. I want a baby who sees me as the center of the world, not the supporting cast in Grandma's golden years. Sometimes I wonder what people would think if they saw all my notes, all my messages, my calendar entries. Would they see a paranoid daughter-in-law? Or would they see a woman trying not to drown in a legacy that wasn't hers? You know, people talk a lot about generational trauma, about how pain gets passed down, but they never talk about the moments when someone tries to stop it. It doesn't look pretty. It looks controlling, cold, harsh. But maybe that's the only way to break a cycle. Still, there are nights I lie awake and hear her voice in my head, polite, calm, self-sacrificing, the martyr tone. And I worry. Not that I've gone too far, but that I haven't gone far enough. Because she's not backing down. And I'm not going to wait until she turns my child against me, the way my mother once turned me into a ghost in my own home. So yes, I will finish this. I will end her influence. Before she ends mine. You might hate me for that. You might say I'm cruel. But let me ask you this. If someone's quiet power has controlled every room you've walked into since the day you got married, do you wait for them to win? Or do you claim the space they never let you have? If you've ever seen someone become the very thing they once feared, do you think their past excuses it? Or should we be held accountable? No matter the scars. Leave your thoughts below. I want to hear it all. No side is ever just one shade, because next time we speak, she'll wish she had stayed in the past. I didn't expect the answer to come from the grocery store parking lot. Of all places. It was in front of a dusty coin-operated cart return machine where I ran into Mrs. Donnelly, my former tax preparer, now semi-retired and living mostly in Florida. She was back in town to visit her daughter and recognized me instantly. Goodness. Margot, you still have the same walk like you're on a mission. I smiled. Barely. The kind of smile you give when you're one thread from unraveling. We chatted briefly. She asked about Caleb. I gave the standard answer. He's busy. New baby soon. Her face paused just slightly, as if something flickered behind her eyes. I wasn't sure if you knew, she said. About the trust update. I blinked. What trust update? She shifted her purse, glancing at her phone. I saw something odd on a shared internal system about 6 weeks back. A name came up yours, flagged under something called Legacy Redistribution Pending Review. Thought it was strange, since I processed Harold's documents years ago and everything seemed airtight. My mouth went dry. Do you remember who filed the request? I asked. She paused, then nodded. Some young consultant working under a private firm file was attached to a notarized video confirmation. That's what stood out to me. Video confirmation, I echoed. She nodded again. Looked like someone was verifying your willingness to delegate all household and medical authority to your son and his wife. It was short, but something about it felt off. I thanked her, perhaps too quickly, and left my groceries in the cart. I called Daniel immediately. He told me to request a copy of that recording from the regional trustee office under the Freedom of Information clause, which I did the next morning. 3 days later, I received a secure email link. I opened it with shaking hands. The video was 38 seconds long, blurry, filmed indoors, in a soft, grey-lit room with neutral walls. I saw myself, or rather, a version of myself. The frame was angled from the side. I was wearing a sweater I no longer owned. The lighting flattened the image. I appeared, slow. My speech was muted but legible. I delegate all decision to Madison and Caleb because I trust them. I didn't remember this because it wasn't real. My throat tightened. I leaned in, analyzing every flicker. The hand in the frame, it wasn't mine. The voice, it mimicked my cadence, but the inflection was slightly wrong. AI generated, perhaps, or edited. Either way, it was a fabrication. A legal document had been submitted with video evidence I never consented to. I sent the link to Daniel. He called within 10 minutes. This is manipulated. It might be deepfake or a crude overlay, but it won't hold in court. However, it's enough to delay proceedings. You need to act. Now. I felt it then. The shift. The momentum. I was no longer waiting for rescue. I was the rescue. I picked up the notebook I'd been using for weeks and flipped to a blank page. At the top, I wrote Phase 2 offense. The next day, I met with a digital forensics expert, someone Daniel knew. He analyzed the video, frame by frame. There's a lighting inconsistency in the pupil reflection, he said. Also, the audio waveform looks artificially flattened, definitely tampered. He prepared a statement notarized to that effect. Now I had something, but I needed more. I began reaching out to people Madison underestimated. The old receptionist from the clinic where she'd once dropped off forms. The barista who remembered her odd request to make the coffee extra cold, for legal temperature purposes. The notary public who processed the trust update. It was the notary who gave me the final key. I remember that session, he said. It was weird. The woman barely spoke. The young guy, your son, kept saying she was tired and just needed to get through it quickly. I usually ask for verbal confirmations. He said it would stress her out, made it seem like a mercy. He paused. If I had known, I thanked him, got it in writing, added it to my folder. Each piece was a thread, and now I was braiding them together into a rope strong enough to pull myself out. You know, it's funny how the truth often comes from the people standing just outside the storm. The neighbor, the barista, the tax preparer. They're the ones who aren't blinded by love or loyalty, just watching from a distance, seeing the parts we miss. Have you ever had someone outside your family be the one who finally told you the truth? Someone who didn't owe you anything, but spoke up anyway. If so, I want you to share it in the comments. Those stories matter because they remind us we're not always crazy. Sometimes we just needed the right witness. Armed with this evidence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for the next petition. I was going to face them, but I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I'd do something far worse. I would make them explain themselves in front of people who could finally see the whole picture. Because now I had dates, footage, witnesses, expert testimony. And the woman who was once not stable enough to be trusted with a kitchen drawer was about to be the one who held all the power. I wasn't alone anymore. And I was done being polite. It was supposed to be brunch, a small, intimate gathering at Caleb and Madison's home. Just immediate family. Nothing fancy quiche, fruit salad, fresh juice. Madison called it a pre-baby calm moment, the last chance for everyone to sit down before chaos arrived. At first, I wasn't going to go, but I knew what this was: a carefully curated image, a final scene before my erasure, and I was ready. I wore a cream linen blouse. Simple. Ironed. No jewelry, but my wedding band, which I had quietly slipped back on 2 nights before. I arrived right on time. Madison greeted me with that polished smile, the one that always looked like it was designed by a publicist. "Glad you made it?" she said, brushing air beside my shoulder instead of actually hugging me. The table was set like a magazine spread: rosemary sprigs, folded napkins, personalized name cards. I saw mine Margot Grandma-to-be in gold cursive. The irony nearly made me laugh. There were 7 of us, total. Caleb, Madison, her parents, her sister, and me. They kept conversation: light baby names, stroller brands, postnatal yoga. No one mentioned the baby shower I wasn't invited to. No one mentioned the trust documents. No one mentioned anything that mattered. Until I made them. I waited until the plates were mostly empty. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small white envelope. Quietly. I placed it next to my water glass and cleared my throat. I'd like to share something. Everyone looked up. Caleb blinked. Mom Madison tilted her head. "Is everything okay?" I smiled. The same way she always had. "I've been quiet for a long time," I said. "And I've watched people I love make choices they thought would go unnoticed. But they weren't. Not by me. And definitely not by others." I opened the envelope and took out a folded document. Then a flash drive. I placed both on the table. "What's that?" Madison asked, her voice still sweet. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is a notarized statement from a digital forensics expert confirming the deepfake nature of a video used in a legal submission filed under my name without consent." The table froze. "This," I said, holding up the flash drive, "contains that video, and 2 additional audio recordings, one of which is a voicemail accidentally recorded when you, Madison, suggested Caleb move up the timeline because I was getting in the way." Caleb turned pale. "Wait, what voicemail?" I looked at him. "You never listened to it because you never called me back." Madison's face shifted, not panicked, calculating. "I think you're confused," she said carefully. "You've been under a lot of stress. You fell. You've had lapses." I cut her off. "I also have a notarized timeline of my medical visits. All consistent. And a signed statement from the notary who processed the trust addendum, who now acknowledges he was misled during the process." Her mother tried to speak. "Margot, maybe we can take a deep breath, so," I said, calm as ice. I've been breathing for months, in silence, alone. Now it's your turn to listen. I turned to Caleb. I kept wondering why you pulled away, why you stopped seeing me, why you didn't even call when I fell. And then I realized you didn't know. Not all of it. Because everything Madison fed you was under the surface strategic, gentle, documented just enough to sound reasonable. But it was never about care. It was about control. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted to the flash drive, then to Madison. She straightened her back. You're turning this into something it's not. You're spiraling. I'm documenting, I said. There's a difference. I stood. And before anyone accuses me of being dramatic, let me remind you I didn't ask for this meeting. I was invited to brunch. I brought receipts. I slid the folder across the table to Caleb. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were the forensics report, printed transcripts of voicemails, timeline logs, photos of the forged signature block, a statement from Mrs. Donnelly confirming a flagged trust file. Caleb turned sheet after sheet. His hands trembled. Is this all real? He whispered. You tell me, I said. No one moved. You could feel the tectonic shift in the air. A quiet gathering turned into a courtroom. There were no gavel bangs, just realization, and the sound of Madison's defense collapsing under the weight of her own curated narrative. You know, I used to think confrontations needed to be loud to be effective, but sometimes silence is more deafening, especially when it's full of truth. If you were at that table, what would you do? Would you side with the one who's smiling or the one who's proving? Would you ask for more evidence, or would you trust your gut? Leave a comment below. I'm curious not just as someone who lived this, but as someone who knows how hard it is to choose sides when truth makes everyone uncomfortable. Madison stood slowly. I need a moment, she said, then walked out of the room. Caleb followed her, folder still in hand. I didn't move. I just looked around at the table I wasn't supposed to be seated at anymore and waited. Because the final verdict that was coming next, the following Thursday. I walked into the law office of Gutierrez and Hale, a small firm in Sacramento, tucked between a florist and a nail salon. Modest, but sharp. The receptionist greeted me by name. Daniel had already sent them everything. I sat with attorney Nina Hale, a woman in her mid-40s with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of expression that told you she didn't waste time. She read through the file slowly, flipping pages, occasionally underlining. When she was done, she folded her hands and looked at me. Margot, I'm going to be blunt. What you've documented here isn't just manipulation. It qualifies under California's Penal Code, paragraph 368, elder abuse, emotional isolation, fraudulent signature usage, forged documents, and the attempted transition of fiduciary control without consent all fall under the umbrella of financial and psychological elder abuse. I nodded. I had read the statute after Daniel mentioned it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She continued, You're fortunate. You have time-stamped proof, expert testimony, and a record trail that leads directly to your daughter-in-law and possibly your son as an uninformed accomplice. The state takes these cases seriously, especially with manipulated media involved. I asked quietly, What happens next? Nina smiled, but there was steel in it. We file for a protective injunction against both parties, initiate a full revocation of the fraudulent trust amendment, and issue a formal notification to the California office of the public guardian. That puts a freeze on any pending transition of power over your property or medical decisions. We'll also initiate a civil complaint under elder abuse statutes and request a review of the notary actions under California Government Code, paragraph 8206. I exhaled slowly, and Caleb. She paused. His involvement may hinge on knowledge and consent, but as of now, we focus on Madison. She engineered this. The filing happened that afternoon. I signed papers with firm strokes. A courier delivered the emergency motion to their home the next day, by Friday. I had a scheduled court date. Nina requested that Madison appear in person. We'd subpoena her if necessary. The hearing was held in a small chamber courtroom, no jury, just a judge in dark robes, a clerk, and two attorneys. Madison arrived in tailored beige, holding her belly with one hand, her attorney's sleeve with the other. She looked polished, controlled, until the flash drive was played. First, the altered video, then the audio clip, then the testimony from the notary. The room stayed quiet, except for the soft hum of the playback system. Madison didn't blink until Nina leaned forward and said, "Your Honor, what we're witnessing here is not just deception. It's premeditated psychological coercion designed to reframe a mentally sound elder as incompetent for the sake of inheritance control. My client is not forgetful. She's not fragile. She's not confused. She's prepared and, finally, protected." Madison's attorney tried to speak. There's no conclusive proof, but the judge held up a hand. Enough. He looked at Madison. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, slowly. "Do you understand that what you've done isn't just morally questionable, it's criminal? Had this progressed one step further, had this woman's property been sold, or her rights stripped without due process, you would be facing felony charges today." Madison looked down. The judge turned to Caleb. "And you, if you claim ignorance, that's your right. But in my courtroom, silence is not innocence. It's complicity." Caleb didn't respond. He couldn't. Then came the final blow. Nina slid a single page across the table. "We're also filing to remove Madison Henderson as an emergency contact, medical proxy, and any future executor of Margot Henderson's estate, effective immediately. Under California Probate Code, paragraph 850, we are initiating full recovery of authority." The judge signed the injunction. And just like that, the power she had so carefully built collapsed in one signature stroke. Have you ever seen someone lose everything, not with a scream, but with silence? That's how it happened. She sat there, hands folded, lips pressed thin, and said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. You know, in situations like this, people always ask, was it enough? So I'm asking you, do you think what happened to her in court was justice? Or was it too little for the months she spent trying to erase someone's life? I'd like to know what you think. Leave a comment. If this happened in your family, would you forgive? Or would you fight harder as we exited the courtroom? Nina leaned over and said quietly, "You didn't just win this hearing. You reclaimed your identity." I smiled, but only for a second, because even with all the signatures, the papers, the rulings, one thing still remained unfinished. I hadn't spoken to my son, not really. Not yet. I didn't rebuild overnight. Power, real power, doesn't return in one grand gesture. It comes back in quiet mornings, in waking up and not flinching at the sound of your own name, in setting the table for one and realizing you still deserve linen napkins and hot coffee. After the hearing, I didn't see Madison for weeks. Caleb sent a short message, "I need time." I understood. He was standing between two ruins, the illusion of a perfect marriage and the fragments of a mother he thought had disappeared. I gave him space, but I didn't disappear again. Instead, I began tending to the garden. Harold never finished the one in the back, behind the shed, where he always meant to build a raised bed for tomatoes. I ordered lumber, hired a contractor, and by the second week of May, I was kneeling in dirt, pressing basil seeds into the soil, the sun warming the back of my neck. Word began to spread, not from me, but through the edges of town, about what happened, about the court ruling, about the woman who fought back without screaming. People stopped me at the post office, at the community centre, at church. One woman, no older than 30, with a toddler on her hip, said, "I've never seen someone stand up like that. You gave me courage to talk to my own mother-in-law." The Reverend asked me to speak at the spring luncheon for caregivers. I declined at first. But then, a few days later, I found the envelope. It had no return address, just a small card inside. 5 words. "You were right. I'm sorry. It wasn't signed, but I knew. Caleb." I didn't cry. I folded the card and placed it in the top drawer of Harold's old desk. Then I sat down and wrote my speech. At the luncheon, I wore a blue silk blouse and the locket Harold gave me on our 25th anniversary. When I stepped to the podium, the room quieted. I looked at the faces in front of me, women of all ages, grandmothers, daughters, women who had been erased and didn't know how to come back. I told them the truth, not the headline, not the courtroom recap. The truth. That sometimes being strong means being doubted. That sometimes protecting your identity means being called difficult. And that the most dangerous lie a woman can believe is the one that says, if you stay silent, you'll be safe. I ended with a question. What would happen if the stories you didn't tell were the ones that could set someone else free? Afterward, people lined up, not to compliment, to confide, to thank, to say, "That's my story too, just in different words." Later that month, I received a letter from a publishing imprint that had heard about my speech. They asked if I would consider contributing to a book on elder justice. I said yes. Then I called the realtor and took my house off the joint title Madison had once attempted to manipulate. I retitled it fully, under my own name, in full legal control. I also took back the room Madison once said was better used as a podcast studio. I turned it into a library, my library, painted the walls olive green, put in a velvet armchair, and I read books I hadn't opened in decades. Then came my birthday, 75, the same milestone that had nearly passed by unnoticed a year earlier. But this time, Caleb came. He arrived at 11:07 am, unannounced, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a small ceramic frog his daughter had made in preschool. He didn't say much, just, "I didn't know how far things had gone. And I'm so sorry I let it happen." I didn't embrace him immediately. I just nodded. Then I poured us tea. He sat at the table like he used to when he was 12, waiting for his toast, his eyes unsure. But something had shifted. And when he asked, "Can we try again?" I said yes. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I remembered who I was, and I had nothing left to prove. You know, the world doesn't always cheer for comebacks when they come from older women. But I've seen it in the comments, in the letters, in the quiet nods. There are so many of us. Women who were once background characters in our own lives now rewriting the story from page 1. If you've ever known someone who went from being erased to being the one no one can ignore, I want you to tell that story. Right here, in the comments. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your mother. Maybe it's someone still finding their voice. But I promise, someone else reading will need it more than you realize. Because what happened to me, it's not just a cautionary tale. It's a declaration. And if you want to hear more stories like this, true, raw, dramatic, and real, then I hope you'll subscribe. There's so much more to uncover. So many voices still waiting. And maybe one of them is yours.